But when your body is starting to, gradually, as you said, drying from the inside because the fluid is now replacing the oxygen and you suddenly pass out, that's a very fine margin that you're dealing with between being conscious and going unconscious. And when you're face down in the water in that prone position, it will take time for other swimmers and for the medical staff to even recognize that there's a problem, and by which time, and unfortunately it could be too late for some people as well.
Welcome to another episode of Physique Transformation. I'm Christian Williams, Global Transformation Coach, and once again, welcome to this podcast where I connect the minds of like-minded people across the globe. And if you're new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button, stay up to date with more videos like the one you're watching. If you like this content, share with a friend, because sharing is caring. Today I'm sat down with a very special guest. He's a triathlete that could have lost his life in his first full Ironman competition. Jay Burnside is 51 years old. He's an architect from Derry and he was living in Dubai since 2001. He started competing in triathlons a few years ago. He competed in his many half-Ironmans, and just last season he competed in 2 Ironmans back-to-back, the Oman and the Dubai, which spurred him on to sign up for a full Ironman. The full Ironman was held in Vitoria Gasteiz, I want to say that correct if I'm saying that, in northern Spain. His preparation went well, but just 500 meters into the swim, his breathing became difficult, but he felt that he would settle down. By 1 kilometer into the swim, he began to panic. Soon after, he developed a deep, wet cough, and he knew that something was wrong. He continued into the swim for the remaining 2.8 kilometers, trying to make sense of what was going down. He went into survivor mode, but knew that he needed to get out of the water. So he continued. He finished the cycling segment of the event. He got out, he jumped on the bike, and he continued to pedal for the next 112 miles, which is 180 kilometers of the cycle, which led him into the last discipline of the Ironman, which is a full marathon, 26.2 miles, 42.2 kilometers. He knew he should have stopped, but he was compelled to finish. That's his competitive drive within, and that's what we're here to talk about today. What he didn't know, that he suffered from a rare condition, a swimming-induced pulmonary edema, which is a very rare condition, and it could have cost him his life, which is pretty much drowned in from the inside out. Jay made it to the finish line, and obviously he made it here today. Here to tell his story to you and many other triathletes out there. He is a neighbor to our office building as well. I'm excited to dive into the mindset of a true champion. Jay, welcome to the podcast and welcome to the space.
Christian, thank you very much for having me.
How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Yeah, very
good. You all
good.
Broken up, ready for the Christmas, the New Year?
Well, of course, but as we know, I think training always is on in the background, so it's always just managing family and Christmas and trying to enjoy ourselves in equal measure. But yeah, we're getting there.
Burn off the pudding, the extra pudding.
Well, make room for it, yeah.
Yeah, we put up a really good live training last night talking about how to strategize to maintain the calorie influx over the next couple of days. Yeah. So we can dive straight into it, really. Obviously, when we were talking on the bike a few weeks ago, before I had my accident, you were telling me about the story, and this story that I just kind of overlaid there briefly about how you were, first Ironman, and actually you told me the story in a way of almost discrediting the result because you was really unhappy with the result. I remember saying to you, you know, have you got any Ironmans coming up? And you were saying, well, no, I did an Ironman, and you know, I didn't get the result. And you took some time to tell me why you didn't get the result that you wanted. And I thought that was interesting because you didn't ultimately tell me that before I asked. So the first thing I want to go into, and for our viewers there, as you know, on that conversation, I told you that when I was nominated for Personal Trainer of the Year, the case study that we had to prepare in front of the judges was on an average person training for an Ironman. So I had to do a lot of research and I had to provide a strategic plan to take somebody from where they were to where they needed to be. And I was overwhelmed and incredibly inspired by what it takes to be an Ironman. So that's what I want you to outline here. What does it take to be an Ironman? And what was your preparation like physically, mentally, and emotionally?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I, as I said to you at the time, I mean, I think your first objective is always, you know, you set these targets and you set them for personal reasons. And for me, after many years of being involved with sport and coaching sport and my own kids doing a lot of sports, I was kind of very softly introduced to the idea of triathlon. And then with finishing each one, you try and set your goals a little bit higher. And to this year decide that I was going to take the step up to a full distance, the first thing that you probably start to panic about is how can you fit the training in? But the one big lesson for me in it is that, you know, 9 times out of 10, the hardest thing is just signing up and getting yourself into the frame of mind that I've done it, I now need to just crack on. And it's amazing how quickly you discipline yourself to suddenly start setting the alarm, getting up, getting your run in. And the way that the training works is that, you know, you have a few months to kind of build into it. Fortunately, because I've always had a kind of sporting background, you're not coming in at level 0. And I'm sure for your case study, you're taking somebody from probably a very low level to the kind of ultimate extreme. But for me, I was kind of coming in somewhere in the middle, and I felt very comfortable straight away with the idea that I was going to have to commit a lot of time to training. Possibly the hardest thing that I didn't realize was the effect that it would have on my family in terms of not being able to just, you know, ad hoc it and say, right, tonight we're going to do this, or this weekend we're going to do that, because you had your training blocks. And it was amazing, as I say, how selfish you almost became. You just dialed in straight away and you just committed to it because you knew it was a 3-4 month period. It wasn't going to take forever. And the load, in managing the load in, you know, week on week, increasing that, your body does give you a lot of really good, you know, indicators as to how you're training, how you're feeling. One of the things I knew being in Dubai was going to be a problem was eventually the weather was going to start to play a major factor in the training as well. Because it was my first one, I was quite naive around I suppose the nutrition. I mean, I know you have to eat a lot because you're burning a lot of calories, but it wasn't just that, it was the recovery. It was dealing with dehydration. It was dealing with, you know, as you know yourself, cycling in 42 degrees and 80% humidity. It puts a tremendous load on your body. And it just takes time afterwards to fully recuperate. So it was trying to balance all of that out. But I felt the training had gone really, really well. And as I say, I was motivated by the thought that, you know, this was going to be my big thing that I was focusing on. And I didn't expect it, as I say, to go the way it went. But that's what part of the mental preparation of training for an Ironman teaches you as well, is that you have to have a plan B. I mean, this might have been plan Z in most people's you know, contingency, but you just have to adapt, you know. And again, as I said, I think when you're in that frame of mind that you know you need to finish, you don't know why you need to finish, but it's just ingrained because of all the training. You feel that on the day you just can't let yourself down and let anyone else down, and you find the motivation to keep going. But as I said, probably for me, had I have known, and I mentioned to you before, had I known maybe how serious it could have been, that might have changed the outcome dramatically for me in terms of whether I would have just quit halfway through the swim and been medically withdrawn. But, you know, sometimes, you know, a bit of ignorance is bliss, as they say, and I find a way to get out of the water. And as I explained to you before, from that point on, it's down to your tenacity and drive not to give up, really.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that with the family as well, because a lot of people, they don't really consider until it's almost too late really, and the blocks of training, imagine you putting in plus 10, maybe even 14 hours a week.
But by you starting maybe at about 10, by the time you're ready to race, you're up to nearly 20 hours. And that's easy to manage, as I say, in terms of if you're disciplined, if you're up early, you can get a block in the morning, you go to work, you train in the evening, you go home, you kind of have time with your family. The weekends were tough because that's when you had, you know, your 6-hour ride, you had to follow the next day with a big run, a big swim, another bike. So maybe over the weekend, you might be up to nearly 10 hours just at the weekend. So trying to still maintain a normal life. And the other thing is, you know, not go home and fall asleep on the couch for 4 hours afterwards. You know, you had to try and maintain your kind of drive and your energy to show other people as well that, you know, you were still part of a family. And I know my family were very, very accommodating, but, you know, I could tell by the end of it, they were also just glad to get it out of the way because, you know, it kind of brought a sense of normality back to the house when it was done.
I mean, like I said to you previously, you know, coming from a competitive background for many years and being very athletic and realizing how much of a strain this causes on the family. I mean, the family are just as much as part of your team as your coaches and your advisors, because they're along with you. And I really understand where you say not just about letting yourself down, but the other people, because they've invested. And I've done competitions in the past where if I looked back, I probably shouldn't have done at the time, but one of the reasons that kept me doing it was the sacrifices that not only I made, but the people around me also made for that. So before we start going into the deeper questions, I wanted to just outline everything that it takes to kind of put in to get to that type of level first. And I think it's only fair for the viewers to just talk a little bit about this condition and, you know, my understanding of kind of what it is really. Since speaking to you, I've done a little bit more research, and it is a very rare condition. I know you wasn't even aware of the condition before you had it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, as I say, in that situation, had I have known, first of all, you know, what were the symptoms, and start to analyze the problem from, well, okay, could this be, you know, a pulmonary edema that's coming on? We're talking about a year ago. We're talking about a time when COVID was still very prevalent, you know. So in the back of your head, you're thinking, well, maybe if I got COVID. So, you know, it kind of blurs your vision a little bit, for want of a better description, in terms of the judgment and the calls that you'll make. But knowing that it has got this really, really horrible side to it, which is, I've also done a little bit of research since in terms of just what is the effect and how bad can it get? And it is fatal, you know, and I think part of the great thing about this podcast will be that even if 2 or 3 people who are watching this understand the symptoms before it really turns nasty, then there'll be great value in kind of spreading the message around, you know, we can be ultra fit and we can push our bodies to some extreme levels, but at certain points when our body starts to break down, knowing what those triggers are and knowing that, well, I maybe have a very limited window before I pass out in the water. And you drown. And a lot of the kind of reports that are written after these things tend to generalize in, you know, got into trouble while swimming, drowned. But actually what
kicked in the face.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people are now starting to question and say, well, maybe was there something before this that led to a super fit person just suddenly passing out in the water? So just through friends of friends, you know, telling people about my experience, listening to other people's experience, it does happen in triathlon. It happens when you're immersed in cold water.
With the wetsuit on as well.
And with the wetsuit, absolutely. And unfortunately, with the sport and this kind of extreme length that you're kind of swimming, and sometimes the cold water that you're training in as well, it does happen, and it happens probably more than people realize. It's just that they've been lucky, like me, they've been able to get out of the water and continue, but there have been a number of cases this year that I know of where people have passed away during the swim, probably through a lack of knowledge also, and just a feeling of invincibility because you've been training hard for 6 months, that you feel that, well, it can't be anything physically wrong with me, I'm ready for it. But when your body is starting to, you know, gradually, as you said, drying from the inside because the fluid is now replacing the oxygen and you suddenly pass out, that's a very fine margin that you're dealing with between being conscious and going unconscious. And when you're face down in the water in that prone position, it will take time for other swimmers and for the medical staff to even recognize that there's a problem, and by which time, you know, and unfortunately it could be too late for some people as well.
You know, and like you said, you know, your mentality and your competitive drive from your athletic career, as well as, you know, motocross racing, superbike racing, right, motorsport racing, obviously pushed you through. And some people might have, with the different situation, the different environment, like you said, you flew to Spain, even that you might think, well, maybe it's just the water temperature's cooler, maybe that's why I don't feel as strong. And some people might have actually bailed out before the finish line. And as we know, with this type of condition, what makes it difficult to spot as well, because by the time often enough you get to the medical theatre or emergency services, the oxygen levels and everything is recited. So it could be the case of people might not even know they've had this, they just feel poorly. And you touched on a good point about, you know, if one person or a few people listen to this and it kind of encourages them to take a little bit more precaution. One of the main reasons I wanted to jump on this with you is because I know personally a lot of people, they take up an Ironman just to get in shape. And, you know, it's safe on the joints, that's one thing. So they think, well, I'll just sign up for this event and that will encourage me to do the work I need to do, which will lead to this physical goal. And when I kind of studied what it takes to be an Ironman more, I was blown away, and I was actually encouraged and inspired to do one myself. And then I'd realize how much of the weight training I have to give up, and I just wasn't willing to do that. That's why I took up a cycle a little bit more frequently. But I want to share that message to them and say, look, you know, this is no joke. I mean, this is one thing, but also what you put in your body under. You know, we talk about these numbers here. We have a 3.8 kilometer swim, 180 kilometer cycle, and a 42.2 kilometer run. That, you know, that's no joke. You know, you're a fit guy, you know, and that's...
absolutely, and as individual events, you know, most people would be happy achieving one of those goals on any given day. And the unique thing about the sport, and as I say, I mean, my experience throughout the whole thing was incredibly positive. And when you're in that, whether it's for your own competitive satisfaction or being part of a group of people who are all sharing the same experience, because people will be there with all, you know, different range of time objectives in terms of how, you know, how fast they can do it or improving on a previous race. The experience was, you know, really good, very rewarding, and to be able to come out the other side of it and now you say, well, look, you know, preparation is everything in these things, and sometimes also just a little bit of this sharing of the experiences and the things that can go wrong, because we always plan for a perfect race and you always hope that your training times is going to give you that perfect finishing time that you wanted. And when we spoke that day whilst we were cycling, yes, I was hesitant to say why my time wasn't the time that I wanted, because probably the feeling that I had most when I crossed the line wasn't one of being elated in that I've finished and I've achieved something. It was the realization that, well, that wasn't good enough. And that was before knowing again about the condition that I had picked up during the swim, but it was this sense that something wasn't complete and I needed to maybe think again about, should I try again? So my big challenge for this year now for me is going to be, you know, I can focus on this swim, but I really need to link the cause and effect of why it happened. And you said you've done a lot of research. You'll probably find, as I have, there's very, very little science at the moment supporting why this condition comes on. If you look at just pulmonary edema, there's pages and pages and pages, but it is the same condition. It's just the trigger is a little bit less research, and people have less knowledge about why. We have lots of knowledge about, you know, high altitude climbers getting it, and we all understand it because lots of people do it. But I think as a community of triathletes and, you know, endurance athletes, or even just beginners wanting to come in and try one of these for the first time, this knowledge, I think, is really quite useful to be able to say, well, look, you know, we need to know more about it. And if you feel in any way that your breathing is starting to suffer, then go through your routine of being able to calm yourself down in the water and get through that traumatic experience of getting into the washing machine at the beginning with all the competitors around you. Find that bit of clean water and just try and settle down. But if it's not, don't also be frightened to think that, well, maybe today's not my day. And as I said, I didn't know that I had it, so today was the day I was going to finish, but it could have happened and it couldn't have turned out to be incredibly different.
Well, lucky it turned out the way it did, you know, because like I said, more people will be aware of this type of threatening condition, really. And I want to talk about a little bit about the day and the event, but also what I was understanding, as much as there's not a lot of research, some of the triggers for this are somewhat inevitable. So the downside is like, how do we avoid that, you know? So, you know, the fact of, like you said, you got the adrenaline going, you know, you got the sugary type of drinks in the bloodstream, you've got obviously the water going from a temperature, and then the jacket or the, you know, wetsuit. So let's kind of rewind to the day. So you wake up, the day is normal day, you have a breakfast, a normal breakfast.
Yeah, I mean, look, you know, preparation on a day like that is, you have to train the way that you're going to race. So it was just a normal day. The alarm goes off earlier, you're getting food in there, you know, and again, everyone calibrates themselves differently in the sense that, you know, some people have to have a big breakfast, some people can, you know, go with a lighter. I was trying to experiment myself with just being very self-sufficient throughout the day, so I knew that I needed to get a certain amount of food. The forecast for the race was actually, there were a kind of mini heat wave was coming through northern Spain at the time, so it probably should have been high 20s, low 30s. It ended up on the day being 36, and as I explained to you during the ride, and we share, you know, regularly on rides here, our temperatures can be 40 plus. So my training was getting increasing in intensity, but also during a very, very hot period of time in Dubai. So for me, the problem was the temperature differential was coming down. So the water temperature of maybe 20 degrees was almost a 20, 22 degree difference, temperature differential from what I'm used to training in to the water on the day. What I probably realized now is that I didn't have enough time to fully acclimatize to what I thought were cooler temperatures, what everybody else thought was much warmer temperatures, because they were training in Northern Europe, coming to Spain, and they were all trying to deal with this idea that they were going to be dehydrated on the day, that they weren't going to be able to compete because of the heat. And what caught me out in the end was not the heat, it was the cold. And it was the cold of being up early in the morning, you know, you're standing in a large holding area, which is on grass, you're in your bare feet, you may be waiting for an hour, hour and a half before the race starts, you're continuously drinking water because you've got this idea that, you know, it's going to be a long day, it's going to be hot, I'll get the fluid in. You're wearing the wetsuit for the whole time, so your body has been compressed as well, you know, in the wetsuit for maybe even an hour before you actually get into the water. So you start rewinding afterwards and you start putting all these things together, and you can understand before you even get into the water how stressed you are, whether you feel it or not, but how much stress your body is already under from the temperature and from the wetsuit, the extra fluids that you're taking in. And, you know, like all endurance athletes at that point, you've had a big block of training, so there's a good chance that you've been taking some anti-inflammatories throughout that training just to deal with aches and pains and wear and tear. And I had ticked the box for every one of them, so I was probably the perfect candidate for this to happen to as soon as I got into the water, just because of the alignment of all these different factors. But the whole day, as I say, started perfectly normally. The day before, I had my reconnaissance swim where I went and did a kilometre or so in the water just to get used to the setting. My cycle, my run, everything felt completely normal. It was just, as I say, after 500 meters, a realization that this is just not settling down. I'm not getting into my comfort zone and into my stride. And by a kilometer, that was the panic. The shortness of breath was really starting to send some triggers that were really, you know, a panic attack, feeling like I needed to get the wetsuit off. And you're constantly then trying to battle with that because you're swimming further and further away from the shore at this point, and you need to calm yourself down to a point where you don't really just become a mess and panic to the extent where, you know, you will be pulled out of the water. So it was a very, very normal start to the day.
It's great. So it's great to get into a little bit of that detail. I want to dive into more. So you start to feel panicky.
Yeah.
What's the initial thought of what's going on? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think, I'm sure a lot of the listeners will, have been involved with these kinds of sports. And when you're in that very close proximity and you're in the water, I mean, it does take our body a little bit of time to adjust, to get your breathing rhythms correct, to get your stroke, to get clean water where you're not getting kicked and punched from the competitors around you. And there is always a settling in period, and your body needs to adjust from, as I say, standing for an hour to lying flat and swimming. So the training kind of gives you a kind of timing, like a natural timing that you start to know, well, it takes me 200 meters and I'll start to get my breathing. By about 500 meters, as I say, it wasn't settling down. And it's all kind of post-rationalizing now, but when I go through the day again in my head and I start to realize that, why is the swim feeling really tough today? I mean, I've done all this training, I've swum longer distances as part of the training. This should be easier. And also in Dubai, I wasn't training in a wetsuit. I was training, because the water temperatures are so high, I was training without a wetsuit. So I had all this extra buoyancy. So all these things should have made my race much better, much faster. I really struggled with getting my breathing settled. I felt like I did for a bit, but then just this overwhelming feeling of just being really tired, and my arms just couldn't pull as much and my legs felt heavy and I felt like they were sinking. And it was almost like you were at that point where you were really taking in water, like you were gasping to breathe. And that's what started to, as I say, kind of, really mess with my head a bit, in that, well, I'm definitely fit enough. I just don't understand why I'm suddenly feeling so feeble and weak. But as I say, the kind of the spirit of just, well, keep going another 50 meters, maybe it'll calm itself down, another 100, another 100, another 100, and then you're at a point of no return, almost in terms of the shape of the course, where you're then starting to think about coming back. And that's when, as I say, the survival mode of getting back to shore kind of kicked in. But what had actually happened from that kind of first kilometer up to maybe the 2 kilometer mark where you start to turn around was developing this very wet, very rattly feeling in my lungs. And then I got to the point when I was swimming, I was having to kind of cough, because it just felt like, as you're lying flat, it just felt like it was lying in my chest, and I had to cough to clear it. But as I said, with COVID and everything else, I'm going through different scenarios. The air conditioning was a bit stuffy, maybe I've got a bit of sinus. And you're not quite sure, but again, your body's reacting. It's saying, look, you need to get this fluid out, which I didn't know fluid at the time, but I was just a cough, So it was gradually, each thing was starting to impact on the other, and it was starting to kind of maybe give me an idea that, yeah, look, I'm in trouble here. And the time went out the window. My head just switched from, just get out of the water, forget about the day, get out of the water, get yourself back, and then we'll see what the next step will be. At 2 kilometers, I did stop for a minute, because, as I said, I had this feeling that I was literally drowning. The medic in the kayak came up and said, look, are you okay? And I said, look, just give me a minute. He said, right, I need you to keep going. I need you to get back into the kind of swim lane. And I did, but it was just a process then, because I could see the shore of, 100 meters at a time, 100 meters at a time. And eventually, when I got to the exit ramp, that's when the obvious, symptoms started to come out, and that's when, you start to cough up. I think I explained to you before. I mean, it's probably like strawberry milkshake. It's like a pink foam that you start to cough up, and that was almost instantaneous. As soon as I got out of the water, I was almost wobbly from the lack of oxygen. But the first thing my body started to try and do was just get rid of this kind of fluid from my lungs. I noticed by the time I ran up to the transition area, by that point it started to get redder, which started to look a little bit more like there was some blood within it. But again, still completely oblivious to what the condition actually was at that point. And that's when the big decision came then. You're sitting in transition, do I get on the bike? And the only thing I could think about was just the worst headache I ever had. I mean, it was just obviously the lack of oxygen had just brought on this huge headache. And I thought, well, I'll just get on the bike and I'll cycle to the first tent I can find and see if there are any headache tablets. And that's how the day then changed and unfolded, as opposed to, as I say, the perfect start with the perfect race. Suddenly I'm you know, trying to get out of the water, trying to get to the bike, but just this overwhelming feeling of being short of breath, very lethargic, no energy, but mentally still prepared to try and get through the day, or at least get to the first aid tent and see how the day unfolded from there.
Brilliant. So you jump on the bike. I mean, are you tough on yourself at this point, or are you just more encouraging yourself to get to the next stages?
I think the natural disappointment has gone, you know. The idea that all the training, all the kind of splits that you had worked on and all the techniques that you'd got between, you know, trying to get into transition, get changed, and all the minutiae that you'd planned for is just, it's gone. You know your body's not right, you're not feeling good. But as I said, getting on the bike and then 20 kilometers becoming 40 and 40 becoming 80, and you know, you get over the 100 and then you're like, well, I'm halfway there now. So it's amazing, you know, how you then kind of condition yourself, as I say, to give your goals step by step. And also you're at that point, you're able to take on a bit of nutrition. You've got access to kind of food and supplements around the course. So the fact that also, you know, you're still cycling with people, there's still people around you. It's not that you're the last guy in the field. You know, you're still with other people, and you're sensing that they're struggling with the heat, or maybe their training plan was better or not as good. So everybody's sharing a certain degree of pain and discomfort, because that's what you've signed up for on the day, is quite an extreme event. So it was encouraging also that you're kind of cycling with people at the same speed. So it's not then all negative thoughts. It's like, well, you know, we're all doing it. We're all dealing with a different problem
in itself.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, it was kind of just automatic mode at that point of you know, just going through the kilometers, clicking them off, and then getting yourself ready to come into transition to run. And then that's when the next mental hurdle comes, because you do physically come to a stop and you change your shoes and you have to stand back up again and look at your watch and it's 0, and then, you know, keep going until it says 42. So
it's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you finished in 13 hours something, right?
Yeah, it was just over 13 hours. Yeah, 13, 20 or 22 or something like that.
So there's a lot of time, you know, to be exercising, a lot of time with no headphones, a lot of time on your own.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of time to motivate yourself to get to every stage and all the way through.
Yeah.
But it must have been in a dialogue of like, what the hell is going on within, like, trying to work out, like, what is the issue with me? Did you ever think, like, is this something really, like, serious, something that I should be really concerned about? I
mean, I think you can maybe, you can put on a kind of facade of being, you know, wow, I just cracked on with it and I wasn't really worried about the consequences. I think that would be a bit naive to say that. I think in the back of your head, you're trying to deal with the task in hand, that's foremost, but in the back of your mind, you're sitting there going, there's something not right, I don't know what it is, you know. But as I said, as somebody who's always been involved with sport, you know you've got a certain level of base fitness. You know that where your limits kind of naturally are. And this just didn't feel like anything like that. So what I was trying to work through was it a side effect of COVID? Maybe the shortness of breath. Was I maybe, you know, one of these kind of cases where you have all the symptoms but you don't really have any of the side effects immediately? So that was one kind of train of thought. Coughing the blood was a concern, because I thought, well, this is definitely something to do with my lungs. Knowing that it was something to do with my lungs explained why my limbs felt really heavy whilst I was having this real shortness of kind of breath, even when I would stop at an aid station to take on some fluid or some food, and you would find yourself really panting and really, you know, drawing quite heavily, but not getting the return on the oxygen. You're not getting the same kind of feeling of satisfaction taking a breath. Everything felt a bit short and a bit stunted in that sense. I thought, as I said, as the more I went on in the day, I was watching my time, I was just watching my running speed, and I was fairly consistent for the first kind of 10, 20, 30 kilometers. And then I noticed in the last 10 kilometers, my pace started to come back a little bit, but nowhere near my training times. But I just felt, well, whatever it is starting to ease off a little bit. And I think that, you know, if the research you would have read says the same things. You know, within a 48-hour period, you can almost be back to normal. So I had this feeling that my body wasn't giving up. I wasn't giving up, but somehow I was slowly just starting to feel a bit better. The headache had gone. There was no real fatigue in the sense that I felt like I just physically couldn't get over the line. It was just managing my breathing, managing my pace, and just trying to find a way, as I say, to get to the finish line. And then that's probably when I was, stood there. Eventually I phoned my family just to say I'd finished, and my son had kind of picked up this kind of very frantic breathing, and he said, "Oh, okay, right, that's a bit weird." And then he'd done the research, and literally within 5 minutes sent me this article back again, and he said, "You need to get to hospital, you need to get this checked." But at that point, the day was over. I didn't feel the need to actually go and get medical attention at that point, because I'd got through the day, and that was the hard bit. And it just gradually, this feeling of coming back to normal was starting to be the overwhelming sensation, not this feeling of it getting worse in any way. So
did you go to the hospital?
I had to fly back the next day, so I was basically getting back to the hotel, because by this point it's nearly midnight, so you've got a full day from getting up at maybe 4 o'clock in the morning to midnight. My first thoughts were just to get all your kit, get collected, get back to the office, back to the hotel room.
Get back on the bike?
I was pushing the bike at this point. I wasn't really ready for any more cycling, but I felt okay. I got back to the hotel and I got everything in, and I phoned them again just to say, "Look, please stop panicking. I'm okay. I will go to the hospital when I get back to the UK." My flight was about lunchtime the next day. I went to the hospital the following day, and that's when I realized that I probably knew what I had, but trying to convince the hospital that that's what I had was the hardest thing, because you're sitting there, they're taking your pulse. By that point, you've been training so hard, your pulse is like 42 average resting, and they're like, "There's nothing wrong with you." And I'm going, "No, trust me, I was not good, yesterday and the day before.
Doing too much.
Yeah.
To slow down.
Yeah, and then you're saying, "But I think it's a pulmonary edema," and it's like, "No, you're too young. You don't have all the symptoms." And you're kind of going, "Trust me, this is what I had." And then when you tell them it's a swimming-induced pulmonary edema, most of them, were I wouldn't say they were dismissive. I think they were doing their job to check all these other possible similarities with other things. So they're checking for blood clots and various things. But I think, again, part of what we're doing today is trying to say to people, well, look, don't be frightened of saying that actually I think I had this, and give them the symptoms and tell them why you think you had it, because that's the people who survive and get to, get out of the swim. There are other people who never got that far, and probably because they didn't even have the start of this information, which is, as soon as you start to feel your breathing, as soon as you start to feel this cough coming on, you should probably, your day's over. You should really seriously think about withdrawing from the race. But I did get a checkup, and as I say, everything was absolutely fine. There was still for me an element of, I probably still didn't have the right energy levels. My body was still trying to get that oxygen in and recover. But again, whether it was the training or whether it was because on the day I didn't exert myself as much as I probably had planned. I didn't have any stiffness. The next day I felt like, okay, that's a slight bit of stiffness on the outside of my quads, but not like I'd just done an Ironman. A few days after it, I thought, right, I'm gonna go for a small run just to see how I feel. So I did a 5K run. The day after that, I did another 10K run, and by that point, it was done. It was dusted. It was something that happened a few days ago, and I'm back, training fully since then. So
that was almost a year ago, right?
It was in the beginning of July. So six months.
Oh, no long. So I can sense like a bit of a vendetta building up. So do you also feel you have a psychological maybe trauma to overcome? Do you have any psychological?
I mean, obviously for me, the big challenge is going to be swimming in cold water. I think that's obviously the trigger. That's where it really affected me. I've been swimming since. I've been in the sea. I've done, it's not swimming as an event that's eating me. It's probably just how will I react if I go through the same thing again. If I decide this year now that this season I want to do another full distance, I'll do all that training, and then within 500 meters, I have to pull out because maybe now I'm prone to it. This is another side effect which you don't really know if you have until you're in the water. But there's no really any way to simulate that here in the UAE because we're used to such warm temperatures in the water. Even in the winter, it's still 5 or 6 degrees hotter than the water temperature that I swam in July in the north of Spain. So yeah, let's see. I'm going to have to maybe go and do. I was going to say I'm going to have to go and get in an ice tub and sit in there for half an hour. See how
they have one at the bottom of the stick now. Have you seen
really?
You come down, the guys in the ice truck. But yeah, that's probably, like you said, and you was recovering from COVID as well, I believe, or you know.
No, that's what I'm saying. It was just all the symptoms. In a way, you're at that kind of junction where you think, well, you know, COVID was rampant. I was on a plane from here to Manchester. I had a 6-hour wait in the airport. I was on another plane to Spain. So you think, well, I've had a whole day in a plane with people, you know. You start running these other little things that you know of in your head as the first kind of, well, maybe it's COVID, maybe because the symptoms, to say the shortness of breath, coughing. It was only through my son actually then sending me the article where the light bulb came on, and I think, as I mentioned to you, I was my first event there, and I met a guy in the airport on the way to the event who'd done it 3 times before, and he was really helpful, and he's like, you know, let's meet up, we'll do the swim together, we'll do various things. So he was also interested in trying to learn more about it because he's been doing triathlon for 20 years and never ever heard of this condition. And I showed him the article, and he's like, "That's it. You know, that's what you've got." So again, a bit of sharing of the knowledge is
brilliant.
Is
what time would you have? What time was you aiming for?
I was hoping to get under 11, so I think my time for the day was, I was hoping about 10:40, 10:45, something like that.
So when are you going to do it under 11? Have you put a date on it yet?
That's what I'm saying. That's the big challenge. Let's see how Christmas and the New Year goes. Let's see.
Watch the training with you can draw the outcome of the calories.
But you know, this time around, I think I know in terms of, you know, selecting a race is going to be quite critical. We're very fortunate to live here. We've got amazing facilities. You know, there's a great community of athletes in the region. But the one thing that we all do struggle with is that a lot of the events that would suit us weather-wise would happen in the winter when we can do our peak training. If we have to pick events in Europe, they're in the summer, which the temperatures are they're just not conducive to safely training to the kind of extent that we need. So it's finding the right race, you know, so either before the summer or long enough after the summer.
Europe mostly, I know there's America.
Well, they're mainly in Europe, you see, during the summer, and then you then have lots of races coming up in the Southern Hemisphere and stuff. So I have to be sensible, as I say, you know, there is a family, there is still the cost and the expense of doing these things, and you're trying to juggle it with a working career as well, which, as you know, in this region, I mean, we do work.
And then there's your life to think about. You don't want to die, like, you know,
well,
after all that.
Absolutely. So for me, I think it'll be step by step. I'm training again, as I say, I don't have any immediate goal. I'm just in ticking over mode at the moment and trying to do as much as I can, but not to the point where I've got a training plan. I think the first thing I'll need to do is probably just test myself in some cold water, and whether that's maybe a small holiday somewhere and you just get in the sea and see how you feel for half an hour, just to give me the confidence that, yeah, look, you know, crack on, you know, get it done. Or I just have to select a race maybe in the Far East where the water temperatures will be warmer. And you're just going to have to accept that on the day it's going to be a very hot, humid race. And that's, as I say, these are probably more the logistical and kind of tactical decisions that I need to kind of make at this point in terms of how to manage a big block of training with the extremes of the weather, but then having that race somewhere else, you know.
It's something you're thinking about now, whereas, like you said, you thought that it was to your advantage in a sense, you know, like, oh, at least it's going to be cooler, you know.
Well, I was, for the day, that's why I was really, you know, looking at my times here and going, well, I'll easily take a half an hour off that, because they're just in those fresher conditions, you've trained with that heat and that kind of humidity. It's the same as altitude training. You know, you suddenly go somewhere where the temperatures are 10, 15 degrees cooler, and you just, you know, you just feel so much fresher on each of the events. And that's what I was just hoping for on the day, even though it was still a hot race for a lot of other people. You know, there were a lot of competitors didn't finish that day because of the heat. So, you know, as I say, as you said at the beginning, I mean, there's no joke to undertake these very big endurance events, but the preparation, the planning, that's the process that I'm kind of back thinking about now at the moment. And maybe that's it. Maybe this might be my one and only race, because I get in the water and I find that it's just something I'm now susceptible to. The challenge will be finding something else to do that, you know, you can get the same satisfaction out of, but with less, with less risk. I was going to say, I'm not sure. Wow. I'm not sure base jumping ticks the box of less risk. But but you know, you just moderate again your goals. You know, are you back to doing half distance? You know, or you just do local races? Yeah, it's what you're in it for. You know, if it's the satisfaction, exactly. If it's the training, and you know, we're part of a good cycling group here. You know, there's always a social aspect to it as well. So it's not always about, you know, pushing yourself to the absolute extreme. So
that's great. Yeah. So one last question:
Sure.
What advice would you give anybody listening who's preparing for a obviously Ironman event? Maybe they haven't done one, or maybe they haven't done one in a different country to their own. What advice would you give them moving forward?
I would say it's worth it. There is a very special feeling in the days building up to the race. So when you get there and there's competitors coming in from all over the world, and you're on the plane and you're spotting guys with, you know, hats who've, you know, got their kind of their t-shirt, they've done it before, and you're trying to get advice off them and you're speaking to them. And it is a great community of just, you know, athletes with a very similar mindset. And I would always say that that's what you have to keep in your mind, that when you get there on the day, you will be ready, you know. All the pain, all the early mornings, all the conditioning, you instantly forget about it, and you just turn up on the day and you're so excited to be part of something that is special. And it's not just Ironman. There are lots of other organizations that run these, you know, long distance courses. And it's the same sense of achievement, that no matter what your time is, that everybody gets crossing the line. And you can have your disappointments because of things on the day. But I would say to them that, you know, the training is key. You have to get that structure. You have to get that routine, because on the day that becomes your, if anything does go wrong, that becomes your default setting. You know, you just have to be able to switch to automatic and just get through it if it goes really badly wrong. But for most people, as they say, they turn up on the day and the event is easier than the training. If you get through training, if you don't pick up injuries, and you don't have the cheat days, and you stick to it, then the day is about enjoying it. And I would say that's, for me, as disappointed as I was, I still crossed the line incredibly proud of what I'd achieved. And when I woke up the next day and I had my finisher's cap and my t-shirt and stuff, you're packing it in the suitcase and you're thinking, okay, well, that was great. That was 6 months of my life, but it was worth it. It was still worth it. And I would say for most people, the hardest bit won't be the training. It won't be turning up on the day. It'll just be pressing the button to pay for your entry. And once you've done that, then it's easy.
Commitment. I love it, Jay. It's been a pleasure. It's so positive, the mindset, you know, you're sharing this now. Even now when I'm asking you the advice you give anybody, it's all positive, it's all encouragement, it's all you want to enjoy it. None of it is, you know, don't think about this, you should do that, maybe you shouldn't do it. It's all really authentically encouraging, and I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Christian.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing is caring. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions based on this podcast, this interview, comment below. Like I mentioned, if you are planning an event, just make sure the preparation is in place, take the advice here, seek help from a coach out there who can help you structure the plan. Structure is going to be key, and as always, sharing is caring. If you like this interview, this podcast, share this information. The more people that hear our voices, the more people are going to uptake that knowledge and that wisdom. So thank you once again, and thank you once again.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.